wheels of the stagecoach groaned to a halt, stirring up clouds of dust that hung in the late afternoon air like ghosts of better promises. Clara Wynne pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching Clay Ridge. Montana reveal itself through the settling haze, a collection of weathered buildings huddled against the vastness of the sky, their facades bearing the scars of countless winters. She had traveled 3 weeks from Missouri, her fingers still raw from the final rush of seam work she'd completed to afford the journey. In her traveling case lay the letter that had brought her here, its edges worn soft from countless readings during the long nights on the trail. Silas McCrae's words had seemed so certain then, written in the careful script of a man who measured his promises. I do not seek a housekeeper. Miss Wynne, I seek someone who can stand beside me, not behind. The driver, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained whiskers, pulled her trunk from the coach with practiced indifference. "This all you got, ma'am?" "Yes," Clara said, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. At 5 feet and 10 inches, she towered over most women and stood eye to eye with many men, a fact that had limited her prospects back home. Here, she'd hoped, such things might matter less. "McCrae Place is about 2 miles north," the driver offered, squinting at her. "Though I ain't seen him in town for near a week." Clara nodded, adjusting her traveling bonnet. The burgundy wool of her dress, which she'd sewn herself with careful attention to both durability and respectability, was already collecting dust. She'd made it fuller in the skirts than fashion dictated, knowing she'd need freedom of movement in this new life. The matching jacket, fitted perfectly to her long frame, gave her the appearance of competence she hoped would serve her well. The main street stretched before her, rutted and uneven. A general store, a saloon with its doors already swinging despite the early hour, a modest church with a crooked steeple, and what appeared to be a boarding house made up the heart of Clay Ridge. Men paused in their activities to watch her pass, not with the hostile curiosity she'd feared, but with the blank assessment given to any stranger in a place where strangers meant either trouble or opportunity. At the livery stable, she negotiated the rental of a small cart and a placid mare named Bess. The proprietor, a compact man with kind eyes, helped her load her trunk. "You sure you know the way, miss?" he asked, his concern genuine. "Sun sets quick this time of year, and the McCrae Place, well, it ain't the easiest to find if you don't know what you're looking for." "Mr. McCrae provided clear directions," Clara assured him, though the truth was the directions had been minimal. Perhaps a man used to solitude forgot that others might need more than north past the big oak, then west at the creek. The road out of town was little more than wagon ruts carved into the prairie. Clara held the reins with hands that had grown strong from years of pushing heavy fabric through her sewing machine, from wrestling with bolts of wool and cotton, from making her own way in a world that preferred its women delicate. The landscape opened before her, endless grass rippling like a golden sea, punctuated by stands of cottonwood and the distant purple smudge of mountains. She found the oak easily enough, its massive trunk scarred by lightning, branches reaching toward the sky like arthritic fingers. The creek beyond gurgled with snowmelt, and she turned west, following its meandering course. The letter had spoken of good grazing land, of cattle that grew fat on summer grass, of a house built strong enough to withstand the fierce Montana winters. What it hadn't mentioned was the loneliness that seemed to press down from the enormous sky, or the way the wind carried sounds that might have been wolves or might have been her imagination. Clara had known solitude in Missouri, the quiet hours over her sewing, the empty rooms of the boarding house where she'd lived, but this was different. This was aloneness on a scale that made her feel like a single stitch in an endless fabric. The house appeared just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the world in shades of amber and rose. It was smaller than she'd imagined, but solidly built, with a wide porch and real glass windows that caught the light. Smoke rose from the chimney, and she could see a barn and several outbuildings arranged with careful thought to wind protection and efficiency. Clara brought the cart to a stop in the yard, her heart hammering beneath her stays. Through the front window, she glimpsed movement, a child's face, quickly withdrawn. She climbed down, smoothing her skirts, and approached the door with the bearing her mother had taught her: spine straight, shoulders back, chin level. Never show uncertainty, even when it threatens to swallow you whole. Her knock echoed in the stillness. Footsteps approached, heavy and measured. The door opened. Silas McCrae stood before her, and her first thought was that his letter had been written by someone else. This man, tall and broad-shouldered with premature silver threading through dark hair, wore his grief like a coat he'd forgotten to remove. His eyes gray as winter sky moved over her with something that might have been disappointment or might have been fear. "Miss Wynne," he said, and it wasn't a greeting so much as an acknowledgement of an unwelcome fact. Mr. McCrae." She extended her hand, a gesture that seemed to surprise him. His palm, when it briefly met hers, was calloused and cool. "I've come as we agreed." Behind him, she glimpsed the interior of the house, neat but somehow hollow, as if the heart of it had been carved out and never replaced. Two small faces peered around a doorframe, girls, perhaps 6 and 8, with their father's dark hair and solemn expressions. "I wasn't certain you would actually come," Silas said, stepping back but not quite inviting her in. "The journey is difficult. Many who promise don't arrive." Clara felt the weight of his assessment, the way his gaze lingered on her height, her travel-worn appearance, the practical set of her jaw. She'd encountered this before, men who wanted the idea of a woman more than the reality of one. "Yet here I stand," she said simply. A silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of wind across grass and the distant lowing of cattle. One of the girls, the younger, crept closer, her thin fingers clutching at her father's trouser leg. "Papa," she whispered. "Is she the lady who was going to teach us letters?" Silas placed a hand on his daughter's head, a gesture so unconsciously tender it made Clara's chest tighten. "Go back inside. Mary, you too. Agnes." The girls retreated, but not before the older one. Agnes shot Clara a look of such piercing hope it nearly undid her composure. "Mr. McCrae," Clara began, drawing on the same strength that had carried her through her parents' deaths, through years of making her own way, through the whispers and stares of those who found her independence unseemly. "I've traveled 3 weeks to be here. I've left behind my established clientele and my reputation as Missouri's finest seamstress. I did this because your letter spoke of partnership, of building something together. If you've changed your mind, I deserve the courtesy of honesty." He stood in his doorway like a man guarding a fort against invasion. The dying light cast shadows across his face, making him appear older than his probable 35 years. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of stones. "You're not what I expected," he said. "And what did you expect?" "Someone quieter, smaller, someone who wouldn't—" He gestured vaguely, encompassing her height, her direct gaze, her very presence that seemed to take up more space than her physical form required. "Someone who wouldn't be noticed," Clara finished for him. "Someone who would slip into your life without disturbing its carefully maintained emptiness." His jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're speaking of." "I know grief, Mr. McCrae. I know what it means to arrange your life around an absence. But I also know that your daughters deserve more than a ghost for a father and whatever woman you thought would be content to exist in the shadows of your sorrow." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes, anger, perhaps, or recognition. Then it shuttered closed, and he stepped fully back into his house. "I'm not certain you're what I need. Miss Wynne, the town has lodging. I'll compensate you for your travel expenses." The door closed with a finality that echoed across the empty land. Clara stood on the porch, her hands clenched in her skirts, watching the last of the sun bleed out across the horizon. Behind the windows, small faces appeared again, pressed against the glass like flowers seeking light. She returned to the cart where patient Bess waited, chewing thoughtfully on prairie grass. The ride back to town was accomplished in near darkness, guided by stars that seemed both closer and more distant than any she'd known in Missouri. Each rotation of the wheels carried her away from one failed promise and toward an uncertain future. The boarding house proprietress, a bird-like woman named Mrs. Holloway, took one look at Clara's dust-covered form and rigid posture and asked no questions beyond. "Will you be wanting supper?" Clara paid for 3 nights all she could afford and climbed the narrow stairs to a room that smelled of previous occupants' tobacco and dreams. She sat on the thin mattress, still wearing her travel clothes, and finally allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She had gambled everything on words written by a stranger, and she had lost. But as she unpinned her hat and shook out hair the color of autumn wheat, Clara made a decision. She had not come this far to return to Missouri in defeat. If Clay Ridge had no place for her as Silas McCrae's wife, perhaps it had room for her as herself alone. She would give herself the 3 days she'd paid for to find another way. Through the thin walls came the sounds of life laughter from the saloon, a baby's cry, the creak of footsteps on old wood. Somewhere out there, 2 motherless girls were going to sleep in a house full of silence. And somewhere, a man sat with his grief, having chosen it over the uncertain blessing of beginning again. Clara pulled her mother's sewing kit from her travel case, running her fingers over the familiar tools. Tomorrow, she would walk the streets of Clay Ridge with her head high. She would find work, find a place, find a way to build a life from the scrap circumstance had left her. After all, she was a seamstress. She knew how to make something beautiful from remnants others had discarded. Morning came harsh and bright through the boarding house window, carrying with it the sounds of Clay Ridge awakening. Clara rose, her body stiff from the unfamiliar bed and the weight of yesterday's rejection. She dressed carefully in her second-best dress, a practical navy wool that wouldn't show dust as readily, and pinned her hair with the same precision she brought to her finest stitching. Mrs. Holloway served breakfast in a small dining room that overlooked the main street. "You planning to stay long?" the proprietress asked, pouring coffee that looked strong enough to strip paint. "That remains to be seen," Clara replied, adding sugar to make the brew palatable. "I'm seeking employment. I'm a seamstress by trade." Mrs. Holloway's sharp eyes assessed her. "Might try talking to Jacob Muller at the general store. His wife used to take in mending before she passed last winter. Town's been making do, but making do ain't the same as having it done proper." Clara thanked her and ventured into the street. Clay Ridge by daylight was both more and less than it had appeared yesterday. The buildings showed their wear honestly paint-peeling, boards warped by weather, but there was life here. Women swept porches. Merchants arranged goods. Children darted between wagons like minnows through reeds. The general store occupied a corner lot, its windows displaying everything from lamp oil to ladies' gloves. A bell chimed as Clara entered, and the man behind the counter, presumably Jacob Mueller, looked up from his ledger. He was middle-aged and comfortable-looking, with the kind of face that suggested he'd rather be helpful than not. "Help you, miss?" Clara approached the counter with measured steps. "I understand you might have need of someone skilled in needlework. I'm recently arrived from Missouri, where I operated my own seamstress shop." Muller's eyebrows rose. "That's so can you prove your skill?" From her bag, Clara produced a small portfolio. She'd had the foresight to pack samples of her work, including a miniature shirt with buttonholes so fine they looked machine-made, a piece of embroidery that captured the delicate veining of leaves, and a sketchbook filled with her own dress designs. The merchant examined each piece with growing interest. "This is fine work, Miss Wynne. Clara Wynne." "Miss Wynne? Yes, we've had need since my Martha passed, but I can't offer you a shop. Just a corner of the storeroom where she used to work. You'd take in mending and alterations. Maybe some new pieces if folk can afford them. I'd take 20% of your earnings for the space and the privilege of working under my roof. It was less than ideal, but more than nothing. Clara nodded. When may I begin? Soon as you like. I'll clear Martha's old space. His voice caught slightly, and Clara saw how grief lived in the corners of this town, tucked into everyday conversations like pins forgotten in a hem. She spent the remainder of the morning organizing the small workspace, a cramped area behind the store proper with one window that faced the alley. Martha Muller's ghost lingered in the careful organization of thread spools, in the pincushion shaped like a strawberry, in the half-finished quilt folded in a basket. Clara said a quiet prayer for the woman whose place she was taking and set to work, making the space her own. By afternoon, word had spread. The first customer was the schoolteacher, a young woman named Miss Catherine Price, who needed her skirts hemmed. I'm too short for ready-made, she explained, and I've been trailing fabric for months. As Clara pinned the hem, she learned that Miss Price taught 15 children in the one-room schoolhouse, that the town was growing slowly but steadily, that there had been trouble with cattle thieves the previous summer. It was the kind of talk that stitched a person into the fabric of a place, one conversation at a time. Her second customer surprised her. Agnes McCrae stood in the doorway of the storeroom, a bundle clutched to her thin chest, her younger sister Mary hiding behind her. Papa doesn't know we're here, Agnes said in a rush. But Mary tore her good dress, and Papa can't fix it, and Mrs. Holloway said you could make anything better. Clara knelt to the children's height. Let me see. The dress was indeed torn, a long rent in the skirt, where Mary had caught it on something. But it was the dress itself that made Clara's heart constrict, clearly homemade by loving but unpracticed hands. The stitches uneven, the fit poor, their mother's work, she realized, preserved beyond its usefulness because it carried memory in its imperfect seams. I can mend this, she said gently, but it will show. Would you like me to add something to hide the repair? Perhaps a pocket shaped like a flower. Mary's eyes widened. A flower pocket. Here, I'll sketch it. Clara drew quickly a simple daisy that would cover the tear while adding something beautiful to the dress. Both girls leaned close, their small bodies radiating the particular warmth of children who haven't yet learned to hold themselves apart. Papa won't be angry, Mary whispered. Agnes squared her shoulders with responsibility beyond her years. I'll tell him I insisted. He won't be angry with you. They left the dress, promising to return the next day. Clara worked on it that evening by lamplight, her stitches careful and true. She added not one but 2 flower pockets, and embroidered tiny leaves along the mended tear until it looked like a vine growing up from the hem. It was more work than the repair warranted, but she couldn't help herself. These motherless girls deserved beautiful things. The next day brought more customers, the saloon owner's wife needing a new apron, the bank clerk wanting his trousers taken in, an elderly woman requiring a morning dress adjusted. Clara worked steadily, grateful for the familiar rhythm of a needle through cloth, the satisfaction of making things fit properly, last longer, look better. Late in the afternoon, as she was pressing a finished shirt, a shadow fell across her doorway. Silas McCrae stood there, his presence filling the small space like water poured into a cup. His daughters flanked him, Mary wearing the mended dress with obvious pride. Miss Wynne. His voice was controlled, but she caught the undercurrent of something not quite anger, not quite shame. Mr. McCrae. She set down the iron, meeting his gaze steadily. The girls told me they came here. I apologize for the intrusion. What do I owe you? Clara named a price lower than the work warranted. He paid without haggling, his movements stiff. As he turned to leave, Mary tugged at his coat. Papa, look, flower pockets, and the tier is all covered with vines now. For a moment, Silas's careful composure cracked. He looked at the dress, at his daughter's joy, at the way Agnes stood protective and proud beside her sister. His eyes moved to Clara, and she saw him truly seeing her for the first time not as an inconvenient reality that didn't match his expectations, but as a person who had shown kindness to his children. "Fine work," he said quietly, then ushered the girls out. Clara returned to her pressing, but her hands trembled slightly. She had not expected to see him again, had tried to pack away her disappointment like out-of-season clothing. Yet here he was, disrupting her careful reorganization of hope. That evening, she took her meal at the boarding house, listening to the talk of other residents, traveling salesmen, a surveyor mapping railway routes, a widow who cleaned the church and school, Mrs. Holloway presided over the table like a benevolent dictator, ensuring everyone ate enough and contributed to the conversation. "Saw Silas McCrae in town today," one of the salesmen commented. "Don't often see him away from that ranch of his." "Man's turned into a hermit since Eleanor passed," the widow said, not unkindly. "Those girls of his are growing up wild. Agnes does her best, but she's just a child herself." Clara kept her eyes on her plate, but she listened. Eleanor. The wife's name had been Eleanor. "Heard he sent for a mail-order bride," the surveyor added with the air of a man sharing gossip. "Guess that didn't work out." Heat rose to Clara's cheeks, but she forced herself to remain still. "Mrs." Holloway's sharp eyes found hers across the table. "Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan," the proprietress said firmly. "But the Lord usually has something else in mind. More potatoes. Mr. Garrett." The conversation shifted to other topics, but Clara felt exposed, as if her failed purpose was written across her forehead. She excused herself early and retreated to her room. From her window, she could see the lights of the town spreading into the darkness. Somewhere beyond them, a man sat in a house too empty for the living, while his daughters grew up in the shadow of his grief. She had come here to fill that emptiness, to bring light to those shadows. Instead, she found herself on the outside, building a different life from the one she'd imagined. She picked up Martha Mueller's half-finished quilt from the basket she'd brought to her room, studying the pattern, a wedding ring design, each interlocking circle made from scraps of different fabrics, some women's dresses, perhaps, children's outgrown clothes, pieces of a life stitched together into something useful and beautiful. Clara threaded her needle and began to work where Martha had left off. Stitch by stitch. She added to another woman's vision, understanding that sometimes the best you could do was continue the pattern someone else had started, adding your own contribution to the design. Tomorrow would bring more mending, more customers, more small conversations that might eventually add up to belonging. It wasn't the life she'd traveled 3 weeks to find, but it was a life nonetheless. And for tonight, with her needle flashing in the lamplight and the quilt growing beneath her hands, it was enough. The saloon was crowded that Friday evening, filled with ranch hands spending their wages and townsmen seeking refuge from domestic routines. Clara had ventured in not for drink. Respectable women didn't frequent such establishments, but because Tom Morrison, the proprietor, had commissioned new curtains for the upper windows and wanted to discuss the particulars. She stood near the bar, her back straight despite the curious glances. Explaining the virtues of heavy damask versus lighter cotton, Morrison, a businessman above all, treated her with professional courtesy, though she could feel the weight of eyes upon her. "Those curtains better be worth the talk this'll generate," he said with wry humor. "A lady seamstress in my saloon misses. Morrison might not let me hear the end of it. Quality work speaks louder than gossip. Mr. Morrison." Clara replied, making notes in her order book. It was then that the laughter started harsh, mocking, directed at her. 3 men at a corner table, already deep in their cups, had noticed her height. "Would you look at that?" one slurred. "A woman who could look down on most men. What kind of fellow would want that looking over his shoulder?" "Maybe she could carry him home when he's had too much," another added, and they burst into renewed laughter. Clara's jaw tightened, but she kept her attention on Morrison. who had the grace to look uncomfortable. She'd heard worse in Missouri, endured more creative insults about her height, her unmarried state, her insistence on making her own way. "Gentlemen," Morrison began, but another voice cut through the noise. "Hard to look up when you're already flat on your back in the dirt." The speaker sat alone at a table near the window, a glass of whiskey untouched before him. Clara hadn't noticed him when she entered. He had that quality some men possessed of being both present and apart, like a stone in a stream that water flows around. The laughing men turned, spoiling for confrontation. But something in the stranger's steady gaze gave them pause. He wasn't particularly large, but he held himself with the contained readiness of a man who'd faced down worse than drunk cowboys. "This ain't your concern, Reese," one of them muttered. "Reese." Clara filed the name away as the man continued in that same level tone. "You're right. It's not just making an observation about perspective. Hard to see much when you're looking through the bottom of a glass." An older woman Clara hadn't noticed before, sitting in the corner, usually reserved for the saloon's percentage girls, let out a sharp laugh. "He's got you there, boys. Now quit yapping and let Mr. Morrison conduct his business." The woman was perhaps 60, with steel-gray hair and a face that suggested she'd seen every variation of human foolishness and found most of it tiresome. She wore a respectable black dress that placed her apart from the younger women who worked the saloon, and commanded obvious respect despite her location. The men grumbled, but subsided. Clara concluded her business with Morrison quickly and turned to leave. As she passed the older woman's table, a voice called out, "You there, tall girl?" Clara paused. The woman gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit a minute. Tom, bring the lady a sarsaparilla. On me." It wasn't a request. Clara, curious despite herself, sat up close. The woman's eyes were sharp as a hawk's, set in a face lined by weather and years. "Millie Bradshaw," the woman said. "I run the boarding house at the end of 3rd Street. Also do laundry for half this town and know everybody's business whether they want me to or not. Clara Wynne. I'm the seamstress who's taken over Martha Muller's corner. I know. Also know you came here for Silas McCrae, and he turned you away like a fool." Millie's voice carried no judgment, just fact. Man's been preserving his grief like it's prize-winning preserves, afraid if he lets it go, he'll forget her entirely. Morrison brought the sarsaparilla. Clara sipped it, grateful for something to do with her hands. "Those boys giving you trouble, they laugh because they can't do anything else." Millie continued. "Man sees a woman who don't need him to reach the high shelf, who can look him in the eye when she speaks her mind. Well, that threatens everything he's been taught about his place in the world." "I've found that to be true," Clara said carefully. Millie chuckled. "I bet you have. Let me tell you something. Miss Wynne, this town's full of people running from something or running to something. Most never figure out which. You strike me as a woman who knows exactly where she stands, even when the ground shifts under her feet." From across the room, the man called Reese rose, leaving his untouched whiskey and some coins on the table. As he passed, he touched his hat brim to Clara, a gesture of respect that somehow carried more weight than elaborate courtesy. "Calder Reese," Millie said, watching Clara watch him leave. "Runs a horse ranch about 5 miles east. Lost his wife 2 winters ago in that bad blizzard. Unlike some fools, he grieved proper and then got on with living. Good man, lonesome, but good." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mrs. Bradshaw." "Millie. And I'm not matchmaking, girl, just observing. You'll find I do a lot of that." She finished her own drink whiskey, straight, and stood. "Now, I've got a proposition. My boarding house needs curtains, tablecloths, all manner of household goods. I pay fair and on time. But more than that, I've got a storeroom off the kitchen that's going to waste. Bigger than that corner Muller's got you tucked into. You could set up proper, even live there if you've a mind to leave Mrs. Holloway's establishment." Clara's pulse quickened. What would you want in return? Rent, of course. Plus, first pick of your work for my establishment. And maybe some company now and then. Gets tiresome, being the only woman in this town who speaks her mind without apologizing for it. They shook hands, Millie's grip firm as any man's. As they stepped out into the evening air, the older woman paused. One more thing. Don't let them make you smaller. Clara Wynne, don't stoop, don't slouch. Don't apologize for the space you take up in this world. The ones worth knowing will see you proper. The rest, she shrugged. The rest ain't worth a thread to hem their trousers. The next week, Clara moved her operation to Millie's boarding house. The storeroom was indeed larger, with 2 windows that caught morning light and a small alcove where she could place a cot. Millie helped her arrange things, all the while keeping up a steady stream of commentary about the town's residents. That's Judge Harper's wife coming up the walk. Likes to pretend she's quality, but her father sold snake oil before he struck silver. She'll want everything rushed, but won't want to pay rush prices. Stand firm. Clara soon learned that Millie's assessments were invariably accurate. The boarding house became her university in the study of Clay Ridge society. She met the percentage girls who worked the saloons, discovering many were simply women with limited options trying to survive. She hemmed their dresses with the same care she gave the minister's wife's Sunday best. We're all just trying to make our way. One of them, a young woman named Rose, said as Clara fitted her for a new dress, "Some of us just have fewer paths to choose from." Clara thought of her own narrow escape from a similar fate. How her skill with a needle had been the difference between respectability and ruin after her parents died. She made Rose's dress beautiful, with small touches that preserved modesty while allowing for beauty. Everyone deserved to feel beautiful. The work came steadily now. Word spread that Miss Wynne could make anything fit properly, could mend what seemed beyond repair, could copy the latest fashions from Harper's Monthly with skill that rivaled city seamstresses. She was earning enough to send money to the Missionary Society in Missouri, to put aside savings, to even indulge in small luxuries like real coffee and new books. One evening, as she worked late on a wedding dress for the banker's daughter, Millie brought her tea and sat in the comfortable chair Clara had placed for consultations. "You're settling in," the older woman observed. "I suppose I am." Clara held up the dress, checking the fall of the skirt. "It's not what I planned, but it's a good life." "Plans are like patterns cut from tissue paper," Millie said. "They tear easy and don't always fit when you go to use them. Better to work with the fabric you've got, even if it's not what you picked out originally." Through the window, Clara could see the lights of the town spreading into the darkness. Somewhere, Calder Reese was tending his horses. Somewhere. Silas McCrae sat with his grief while his daughters grew taller each day. Somewhere, all the souls of Clay Ridge were working through their own patterns, stitching together lives from whatever materials they had at hand. "I heard Agnes McCrae's been asking her teacher about learning to sew," Millie said casually. "Seems someone's flower pockets made quite an impression." Clara smiled, thinking of those 2 motherless girls trying to navigate a world that expected them to know things no one was teaching them. "Perhaps I could offer lessons for children who want to learn." "Perhaps you could." Millie rose, pausing at the door. "You know, Clara Wynne, when I first saw you in that saloon, standing tall despite those fools trying to make you feel small, I thought to myself, now there's a woman who might just be exactly what this town needs, even if it wasn't what she was ordered for. Alone again." Clara continued her work, her needle flashing in the lamplight. Outside, a late spring storm was building, promising rain for the thirsty earth. She thought of roots, how they grew deep in unlikely soil, how sometimes the strongest plants were those that bloomed where they weren't originally planted. She was no longer the mail-order bride who'd stepped off the stagecoach with specific expectations. She was becoming something else herself, perhaps in a way she'd never quite managed in Missouri. The woman who stood tall, not despite her height, but because of it. The woman who could meet any gaze directly, who could speak her mind without apology. who could build a life from the pieces she'd been given rather than mourn the ones she'd expected. Tomorrow there would be more work, more small victories, more moments of connection with the people of Clay Ridge. But tonight, with the storm approaching and her needle keeping steady time, Clara Wynne was exactly where she needed to be. The rhythm of Clara's days had settled into something comfortable and predictable. She rose with the sun, took breakfast in Millie's kitchen, and opened her workroom to the morning light. The space had transformed under her hands. Neat shelves held bolts of fabric, drawers organized by thread color, patterns hung from clips along one wall. In the corner, Martha Muller's quilt was nearly complete, worked on in quiet evening hours. Her first customer that Tuesday was Sheriff Calvin Waite, a man whose authority sat as easy on him as his worn leather vest. He needed the elbows reinforced on his coat. Too much leaning on bar tops investigating disputes, he said with dry humor. As Clara worked, he mentioned, "Saw you fixed up the Talbot girls' Sunday dresses. Their ma's been poorly, and those dresses were getting shamefully short. Good of you to take payment in eggs and preserves." "Everyone pays what they can," Clara said, not mentioning that she'd also hemmed curtains for the Talbots without charge. "We all need each other out here." The sheriff nodded approval. "That's the truth of it. Speaking of need, I hear you're thinking of offering sewing lessons." "For the children, yes, basic skills their mothers would teach if—" She let the sentence fade. If their mothers were alive, if they weren't ill, if they had time between the endless labor of frontier life. "My niece might be interested. Lost her ma young, and my brother's hands weren't made for needle and thread." By week's end, Clara had 5 students signed up for Saturday afternoon lessons. She cleared a corner of her workroom, borrowed chairs from Millie, and prepared simple projects, handkerchiefs for the youngest, aprons for the older girls. That first Saturday, Agnes McCrae appeared in her doorway, Mary in tow. "We can't pay," Agnes said quickly. "But I can sweep and Mary can sort buttons, and I promise we won't be any trouble." "The lesson fee," Clara interrupted gently, "is 1 hour of help in the shop per week. Can you manage that?" The relief on Agnes's face made Clara's throat tight. The girl was trying so hard to be everything for her sister, to fill spaces too large for her narrow shoulders. The lesson went well. Agnes had natural skill, her stitches neat and even. Mary, younger and more distractible, spent as much time playing with fabric scraps as sewing, but her joy was infectious. The other students, the sheriff's niece, the baker's daughter, and a shy girl named Penny, whose family had recently homesteaded nearby, formed an easy group. "My mama knew how to make lace," Penny offered quietly as they worked. "Real fine lace from her grandmother in Ireland." "Perhaps she could show us sometime," Clara suggested, and was rewarded with the girl's first smile. After the students left, Clara found $1 tucked under the pincushion. No note, but she recognized the careful folds. Agnes had the same precise way of handling paper that she brought to fabric. Pride and charity warred in Clara's chest, but practically won. The money would buy supplies for the girls' next projects. The following week brought a commission that surprised her. Calder Reese stood in her doorway, a worn leather saddlebag in his hands. "Mrs. Bradshaw said you work with more than just fabric," he said without preamble. His voice carried the same quiet gravity she remembered from the saloon. "Leather's different, but the principles are the same," Clara replied. "What needs doing?" He showed her the bag, a long tear in the side, the leather worn thin in places. "It was Sarah's," he said simply. "She used it for gathering herbs and such. I know it's past saving, really, but some things are worth saving for reasons beyond function." Clara examined the bag carefully. "I can reinforce it, patch the tear. It won't be invisible, but it will be strong." He nodded, his eyes holding a gratitude that went beyond the repair of old leather. As he turned to leave, he paused. "I heard Silas McCrae turned you away." Heat rose to Clara's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. "News travels in small towns. It does. He met her gaze directly. His loss. After he left, Clara sat with a saddlebag, running her fingers over leather worn smooth by another woman's hands. Sarah Reese had gathered herbs in this bag. Probably remedies for her family, poultices for horses, teas for winter ailments. A healer's bag, carried by a woman now beyond healing. Clara worked on it in the evenings. After her regular commissions were complete, she reinforced every weak spot, patched the tear with leather from an old belt, and conditioning the hole until it was supple again. On impulse, she added a small detail, a spray of wild roses tooled into the patch, barely visible unless you knew to look. The shop bell chimed constantly now. Word had spread beyond Clay Ridge to the outlying ranches and settlements. A traveling photographer asked her to create backdrop curtains. The new hotel commissioned bedding. Even the sporting house at the edge of town sent work always through intermediaries. But Clara sewed their garments with the same care she gave the minister's wife's clothes. One afternoon, while she was cutting fabric for hotel pillow shams, Rose from the saloon appeared with an unexpected companion, a well-dressed woman Clara recognized as Mrs. James Fortner, wife of the largest ranch owner in the county. "Don't look so shocked." "Mrs." Fortner said briskly. "Rose and I knew each other as girls in Kansas City, before life took us different directions. Now, I need a riding habit, and Rose says you're the only seamstress worth the name in 3 counties. Clara took their measurements, noting how the two women fell into easy conversation about shared memories, how class lines blurred in the face of genuine friendship. The West had a way of reshaping Eastern proprieties, creating space for relationships that would have been impossible elsewhere. "I'll need it in 2 weeks." "Mrs." Fortner said, "We're hosting the autumn gathering at the ranch. All the county will be there." She paused, studying Clara with sharp eyes. "You should come. We always need educated women who can help organize such events." "That's kind, but nothing. Rose is coming too, as my personal guest. Let them talk." The steel in her voice suggested Mrs. Fortner had faced down worse than gossip. That evening, Millie found Clara on the boarding house's back porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "Heard you caused a stir today," Millie said, settling beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "Mrs. High and Mighty Fortner bringing Rose Lancaster right into your shop in broad daylight." Should I have refused them? "Lord, no, you did right." Millie sipped her coffee thoughtfully. "This town's got more layers than one of those fancy cakes in Harper's Monthly. What matters is finding where you fit, not where others think you should fit." A comfortable silence fell between them. Somewhere, a guitar played, and laughter drifted from the saloon. The air smelled of coming rain and distant sage. "Calder Reese picked up that saddlebag today," Millie said eventually. "Looked at it for a long time, ran his finger over that rose you put on the patch. Then he paid and asked if you might like to go riding Sunday afternoon, see some of the country beyond town." Clara's heart skipped. "What did you tell him?" "That he'd have to ask you himself, like a civilized person, which he will. Mark my words." Millie stood, patting Clara's shoulder. "That man's been alone long enough to know the value of good company, and you, Clara Wynne, are excellent company." Inside, Clara returned to her work, Mrs. Fortner's riding habit wouldn't sow itself, but her mind wandered to Sunday afternoon, to the possibility of seeing this vast country from horseback, to conversations with a man who understood that some repairs were about more than function. The shop had given her more than employment. It had given her a place in the fabric of Clay Ridge life. Each garment that passed through her hands carried stories the young mother who needed her best dress let out after her 4th child, the old man who wanted his union uniform mended for Decoration Day, the teenage boy desperate for trousers that didn't show his ankles after a growth spurt. She was no longer the stranger who'd arrived with specific plans. She was Miss Wynne who could make anything fit right, who taught girls to sew on Saturdays, who treated everyone with equal dignity whether they paid in cash or chickens. She was becoming essential to Clay Ridge in ways she'd never imagined when she'd answered Silas McRae's advertisement. As she worked late into the night, Clara thought about paths not taken and doors that opened when others closed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new commissions, new small dramas of daily life. But tonight, with her needle flashing in the lamplight and the satisfaction of good work in her hands, she was content. The riding habit was taking shape, beautifully dove-gray wool with black trim. Practical but elegant. Mrs. Fortner would look magnificent at her autumn gathering. And perhaps, Clara thought with a small smile, she herself would attend. Not as the failed mail-order bride, but as Miss Clara Wynne, seamstress and teacher, tall woman who didn't apologize for the space she occupied in the world. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall, blessing the thirsty earth. Clara listened to the rhythm on the roof, a counterpoint to her stitching, and felt roots growing deeper in this unlikely soil. She was home. Sunday arrived clear and bright, with the kind of crisp air that made the mountains seem close enough to touch. Clara had changed her dress 3 times before settling on her riding outfit, a practical split skirt in deep brown wool that she'd modified from an Eastern pattern. Paired with a cream blouse and fitted jacket, she'd debated wearing her hair differently, but kept to her usual style, pinned neat and high. There was no point pretending to be someone else. Calder Reese arrived precisely at 2, leading an extra horse, a gentle bay mare with intelligent eyes. He touched his hat brim in greeting, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes warm. "Thought Buttercup here would suit you," he said. "She's steady and kind, with good sense about her. Recognizes, perhaps?" Clara replied, stroking the mare's nose. She was rewarded with Calder's quick smile there and gone like sun through clouds. They rode east from town, following a trail that wound through stands of cottonwood and aspen. Calder sat his horse with the easy grace of a man more comfortable in the saddle than on foot. He pointed out landmarks, the creek where he'd first settled before moving to better grazing, the ridge where eagles nested, the meadow where wild mustangs sometimes grazed. "You ride well for a city woman," he observed after they'd covered several miles. "My father kept horses in Missouri. He said a woman should know how to handle herself, whether on foot or horseback." Clara adjusted her seat as Buttercup picked her way down a rocky slope. He was unconventional in many ways. Sounds like a wise man. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the creak of leather and the horse's steady breathing. The landscape opened before them, endless sky, rolling grassland punctuated by outcroppings of red rock, and always the mountains standing sentinel in the distance. "I wanted to thank you," Calder said suddenly. "For the bag. The roses, Sarah loved wild roses. Had them climbing all over the house until they nearly pulled down the porch." "It seemed fitting," Clara said simply. He nodded, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "I kept the bag in a trunk for 2 years. Couldn't look at it, couldn't throw it away. Having it useful again, it's like having a piece of her back in the world instead of locked away." They stopped to rest the horses near a small spring. Calder had packed simple fare bread, cheese, apples, and a canteen of cool water. They sat on a fallen log, watching the horses graze. "Millie Bradshaw says you're teaching the McRae girls to sew," he said, cutting an apple with his pocket knife and offering her half. "Among others, they're eager students. Their mother was a friend of Sarah's. They used to visit, bring the girls to play." His voice carried old pain, weathered smooth but still present. "Haven't seen them since the funeral. My fault as much as Silas's. Grief makes hermits of us all." "Until it doesn't," Clara said, thinking of how he'd defended her in the saloon, how he'd brought the bag to be repaired, how he'd asked her riding. Some people learn to carry it rather than be carried by it. He looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing past her height and her failed purpose to something essential beneath. "You speak like someone who knows about carrying things." "My parents died when I was 19. Cholera took them 3 days apart. The words came easier than expected. I had a choice: marry the first man who'd overlook my unmarriageable height, or make my own way. I chose the needle over the altar. And that choice led you here, by a winding path. She smiled ruefully, though not the one I expected when I answered that advertisement. Calder's jaw tightened. Silas is a fool, but I won't pretend his foolishness doesn't serve my purposes. The boldness of the statement made Clara's breath catch. Before she could respond, he stood, offering his hand to help her up. A courtesy that had nothing to do with her needing assistance and everything to do with the excuse to touch. They rode back by a different route, through a valley where a creek had carved a miniature canyon. Calder shared stories of his early days in Montana, the brutal winters, the satisfaction of building something from nothing, the way the land got into your blood until leaving seemed impossible. "I thought about it after Sarah died," he admitted. "Selling up, going back east where her people were. But this place?" He gestured at the vast landscape. "It's part of me now. Can't imagine walls and streets after this freedom." "I'm beginning to understand that," Clara said, feeling the truth of it. Missouri seemed like another lifetime, a story about someone else. As they neared town, the sun was beginning its descent, painting everything golden. They passed the cemetery on the hill, its wooden crosses and occasional stone marker casting long shadows. Calder's eyes went there briefly, but he didn't stop. Back at Millie's boarding house, he helped her dismount, his hands steady at her waist. For a moment they stood close, the horses providing a screen from curious eyes. "I enjoyed today," Clara said, aware of the inadequacy of the words. "As did I." He gathered the reins, preparing to lead the horses away, then paused. "Next Sunday, if you're willing. I thought we might ride to the hot springs. They're said to have healing properties, though I suspect the healing comes more from the quiet than the water." "I'd like that." He touched his hat again and was gone, leaving Clara standing in the yard with the memory of his hands at her waist and the promise of next Sunday warming her more than the afternoon sun. Inside, Millie was waiting with coffee and an expectant expression. "Well?" Clara sank into a chair, suddenly aware of muscles she hadn't used in months. "We rode. We talked. He's a good man." "Millie, that he is, more importantly, he's a ready man, ready to live again, not just survive." Millie studied her shrewdly. "Question is, are you ready? You came here planning one life and found another. Can you let go of what you expected enough to embrace what's offered?" It was a fair question. Clara thought of the letter that had brought her west, of Silas McCrae's closed door, of the shop she'd built from nothing and the place she'd carved in Clay Ridge life. She thought of Calder's quiet smile and the way he'd said her presence served his purposes. "I didn't come here to be a replacement for anyone's ghost," she said finally. "Good, because that's not what he's looking for." Millie refilled their cups. Sarah Reese was small and delicate, quiet as a church mouse, needed protecting from strong winds and harsh words alike. You're nothing like her, and that's exactly the point. A man doesn't heal by finding the same thing he lost. He heals by finding something different enough to be new, but good enough to be worth the risk. That evening, Clara worked on a christening gown for the banker's new grandchild, her needle moving in meditative rhythm. The afternoon lingered in her mind, the vast sky, the easy conversation, the feeling of being seen and appreciated for exactly who she was. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Agnes McCrae stood there, twisting her hands in her apron. "Miss Clara, I'm sorry to bother you, but Mary's crying and won't stop. She saw you riding with Mr. Reese today, and now she's convinced you're going to leave like Mama did." Clara set aside her sewing immediately. "Where is she?" "At home. Papa's out checking the herds, and I didn't know what else to do. She keeps saying everyone leaves. That caring hurts too much." Clara grabbed her shawl. "Let's go see her." They walked quickly through the darkening streets. The McCrae house stood as she remembered it, neat, but somehow hollow, as if joy had been swept out with the dust. They found Mary curled in a corner of the kitchen, her small body shaking with sobs. Clara knelt beside her, not touching yet, just being present. "Mary, it's Miss Clara. Agnes says you're worried about me leaving." The little girl looked up with swollen eyes. "You went riding with Mr. Reese. Mama went riding and didn't come back. Now you'll leave too, and Agnes will have to fix my dresses. And she doesn't know how to make flower pockets." Clara's heart broke a little. She sat on the floor, arranging her skirts, and opened her arms. Mary crawled into them, clinging like a burr. "Listen to me, sweet girl. Yes, I went riding today, and yes, someday I might marry and move to a different house, but Clay Ridge is my home now. Even if I lived somewhere else, I'd still be here in town, still teaching you and Agnes to sew, still making flower pockets for special dresses. People can care about each other without disappearing." "Promise." The word was muffled against Clara's shoulder. "I promise. And more than that, I promise to teach you to make your own flower pockets. So you'll always have them whether I'm here or not. We'll make you self-sufficient, just like your papa's teaching you to be with the ranch work." Mary pulled back, considering this. "Could we make star pockets too and moon pockets?" "We can make any kind of pockets you dream up." The crisis passed, Mary's natural resilience asserting itself. Clara stayed until the girls had eaten supper and started their homework. As she prepared to leave, she heard horses in the yard, Silas returning. He entered through the back door, stopping short when he saw her. For a moment, they regarded each other across his kitchen, the lamplight throwing shadows between them. "Miss Wynne, is there trouble?" Mary was upset. "She's fine now." Clara kept her voice neutral, professional. "Your daughters are precious, Mr. McCrae. They deserve every chance at happiness." Something shifted in his expression. Regret, perhaps, or recognition of chances missed, but he only nodded, stepping aside to let her pass, walking back to the boarding house under a canopy of stars. Clara felt the threads of her life in Clay Ridge growing stronger and more intertwined. She was no longer a single strand, but part of a larger pattern: teacher, seamstress, friend, and perhaps, someday, something more to a quiet horseman who understood that healing happened not by replacing what was lost, but by daring to want something new. The first snow came early that year, drifting down like flowers sifted from heaven. Clara watched it through her workroom window, her hands busy with the final details on Mrs. Fortner's riding habit. The autumn gathering was 2 days away, and half the county's women had commissioned new clothes or alterations for the event. A commotion in the street drew her attention. Men were running toward the general store, their shouts muffled by the falling snow. Clara grabbed her shawl and followed, finding a crowd gathered around a mud-splattered rider. "Telegraph lines are down from here to Billings," the man was saying. "Storm's coming in hard from the north. Could be a bad one like 2 winters ago." Clara felt the crowd's collective tension. 2 winters ago, when Sarah Reese had died in the blizzard, when 3 other families had lost members to the cold. She thought of all the outlying ranches, the homesteaders in their claim shanties, the travelers who might be caught on the roads. Sheriff Waite took charge, organizing men to ride out and warn the furthest settlements. "Anyone with extra supplies, bring them to the church," he called. "We'll set up there in case folks need shelter." Clara hurried back to her shop. She had bolts of heavy wool, batting for quilts, thread and needles. But more importantly, she had partially finished coats and cloaks garments commissioned but not yet collected. She gathered everything useful and headed for the church. The next hours passed in a blur of preparation. Women organized food stores. Men reinforced windows and stocked firewood. Children were sent on errands or minded younger siblings. Clara found herself appointed to the clothing committee, tasked with ensuring everyone who sought shelter would have adequate warmth. Miss Wynne, Agnes McCrae, appeared at her elbow, Mary beside her. Papa sent us to town with the Hendersons. He's staying to secure the livestock, but he wanted us safe." Clara pulled both girls into a quick embrace. "You did right to come. Now, can you help me sort these blankets?" As the storm intensified, people began arriving. The Henderson family with their 5 children, old Mr. Garrett from his isolated cabin, a traveling family whose wagon had gotten stuck. Each person needed assessment. Did they have warm clothes, dry shoes, adequate bedding for what might be a long wait? Evening fell early, the snow now driving horizontal past the windows. Clara was measuring a coat against a shivering homesteader's child when she heard a familiar voice. Calder Reese stood in the church doorway, ice in his beard, supporting a man she didn't recognize. "Found him on the road," Calder said tersely. "Horse went lame. He's half frozen." Clara helped settle the man near the stove, wrapping him in quilts while someone brought hot coffee. Calder's eyes met hers briefly, warm despite his frozen exterior. "Your place secure?" she asked. "As it can be. Brought the horses into the big barn. Plenty of feed and water." He glanced around the organized chaos of the church. "Came to see if you needed help here." Before she could answer, Millie Bradshaw's voice cut through the noise. "Reese, good. We need strong backs to move supplies from the boarding house. Clara, you're with us. Agnes, you and Mary mind the clothing station." They pushed through the storm, rope stretched between buildings to guide their way. The world had shrunk to the small sphere of lamplight they carried, everything beyond lost in swirling white. At the boarding house, they loaded sleds with preserved food, medical supplies, and everything else Millie deemed essential. "Just like 2 years ago," Millie muttered, her usual sharp humor subdued. "Except this time we're ready." They made 3 trips, the cold seeping through every layer of clothing. On the last trip, as they paused to rest in the boarding house kitchen, Millie suddenly gripped the table. "Storm's getting worse," she said, but Clara saw her face had gone gray. Millie Calder moved to support her. "Just tired. Haven't been sleeping well lately. Probably nothing." But she let them help her to a chair. Clara felt Millie's forehead too warm despite the cold. Her pulse was rapid, breathing shallow. "We need to get you back to the church where Dr. Morrison can look at you." "Fuss and nonsense," Millie protested, but she didn't resist when Calder lifted her, carrying her like she weighed nothing. The return journey seemed endless. Clara went ahead, trying to clear the path, while Calder followed with Millie in his arms. The rope was their lifeline without it. They could have walked past the church and never known. Inside, Dr. Morrison took charge, settling Millie on a cot near the warmth. His examination was thorough, but his expression grave. "Her heart," he told Clara quietly. "She's been having spells, though she didn't want anyone to know. This storm, the exertion," he shook his head. "Keep her warm and quiet. That's all we can do." Clara sat beside Millie's cot, holding her friend's hand. Around them, the storm refugees settled in for the night. Families clustered together, sharing food and warmth. Agnes and Mary had curled up with the other children. Safe for now. "Stop looking like you're at my funeral," Millie said, her voice weak but spirited. "I'm too ornery to die in a church." "Then don't," Clara said fiercely. "This town needs you. I need you." Millie squeezed her hand. Town needed Martha Muller too, but it survived. That's what places do, they endure, and the people in them find ways to carry on. Her eyes found Calder, who was helping distribute hot soup. "That's a good man. Clara Wynne." "I know." "Then don't waste time. I did once. Thought I had forever to make up my mind about someone. Storm took him before I could say yes." Millie's eyes closed. "Don't wait for perfect moments. Take the imperfect ones and make them count." Clara stayed with her through the night, dozing fitfully in her chair. The storm raged outside, but inside the church, a different kind of atmosphere prevailed. People shared what they had, comforted frightened children, told stories to pass the time, She saw Rose Lancaster teaching card games to a group of teenagers, Mrs. Fortner sharing her expensive traveling food with a homesteader family, the minister's wife sitting with a saloon girl who'd gotten caught in the storm. Calder appeared periodically, bringing tea, adjusting blankets, never speaking but always present. Once, when Clara dozed off, she woke to find he'd covered her with his own coat. Near dawn, the wind finally began to ease. Clara stepped outside to see a world-transformed snow drifted to the eaves of buildings, fence posts buried, familiar landmarks erased. But the sky was clearing, stars visible through breaking clouds. "It's passing," Calder said, joining her on the church steps. "We survived another one." "Most of us," Clara said, thinking of whoever might be lost in the white expanse, of Millie fighting for breath inside. He took her hand, his fingers warm despite the cold. "When the storm started, all I could think was that I hadn't told you." He stopped, started again. "Sarah died because she went out to check on a sick neighbor. Couldn't bear to think of them alone in the storm. That was like her, always thinking of others first." Clara waited, sensing more. "When I heard this storm coming, my first thought was of you, not duty, not neighbors, just, were you safe? Would you have enough wood, enough food?" It was selfish, maybe, but it made me realize something. He turned to face her fully. "I'm ready to be selfish again, to want things for myself, not just survive for the sake of surviving." "Calder, I know it's soon. I know you came here for another purpose. But Clara, these storms remind us how uncertain tomorrow is. I'd rather speak too soon than not at all." She thought of Millie's words, of imperfect moments that mattered more than perfect ones that never came. Around them, the town was stirring, people emerging to check damage and dig out. But here on the steps, in the space between storm and sunrise, there was only them. "I care for you too," she said simply. "Not as a replacement for anyone, not as second choice, but as you Calder Reese, who brings leather bags to be mended and defends tall women in saloons and carries sick friends through blizzards." He smiled then, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Then we understand each other." "We do." They stood together, hands linked, watching the sun paint the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold. Inside, Millie would need care, the town would need rebuilding, life would need to resume its patterns. But for this moment, in the quiet after the storm, two people who had known loss chose to reach for joy again. Sheriff Waite emerged from the church, breaking the spell. "Reese, I'm organizing search parties. Can you lead one east?" "On my way." Calder squeezed Clara's hand once more. "This evening, when things are settled, may I call on you properly? There are things that should be said when we're not half frozen and exhausted." "I'll be waiting." He left with the sheriff, already planning routes and assignments. Clara returned to the church where Millie was awake, weak but determined. "Saw you two on the steps," the older woman said. "Good. Now help me sit up. There's work to be done, and I won't manage it flat on my back." The day passed in a blur of activity. The storm had been fierce but brief, no lives lost, though several close calls. Clara organized clothing for those who'd lost possessions, patched and mended torn garments, and helped distribute supplies. Agnes and Mary worked alongside her, their young faces serious with purpose. By evening, the worst of the crisis had passed. Dr. Morrison insisted Millie remain at the boarding house under supervision, and Clara promised to stay with her. As she helped her friend settle into bed, Millie gripped her wrist. "That talk Calder wants to have, say yes, you fool. Life's too short for anything else." Clara smiled, thinking of morning light on snow, of hands held in the cold, of a future that looked nothing like what she'd planned but felt exactly right. "I believe I will." Outside, the stars emerged in a clear sky, and somewhere a guitar played a melody of survival and hope. The storm had passed, leaving the world clean and new. ready for whatever came next. Word traveled through Clay Ridge like water through a cracked dam. By week's end, everyone knew that Clara Wynne and Calder Reese were keeping company. The responses varied from approval to curiosity to something darker from those who believed grief should be permanent and widowers should remain forever faithful to ghosts. Clara first noticed the shift at Muller's store. Mrs. Harriet Benson, whose husband worked at the bank, made a point of turning her back when Clara entered, discussing loudly with another woman how some people certainly work fast when they see an opportunity. Jacob Muller, to his credit, greeted Clara warmly and made a show of asking about her newest commissions, but the damage was done. Throughout the day, Clara felt the weight of whispered conversations, the quick silencing when she approached, the assessment in previously friendly eyes. That evening, as she worked on a baptismal gown, Millie shuffled into the workroom. She was recovering slowly from her heart episode, but her spirit remained undimmed. "Heard Harriet Benson's been flapping her gums," Millie said, settling heavily into the consultation chair. "That woman's got nothing better to do since her own husband spends more time at the saloon than home." "It's to be expected," Clara said, keeping her stitches even despite her agitation. "A failed mail-order bride taking up with a widower, it does look calculated." "Horsewash." Millie's voice was sharp. "You've been here months, building a business, teaching children, helping everyone who needed it. If you were calculating, you'd have set your cap at Judge Harper's unmarried son with his law degree and family money." A knock at the door interrupted them. Rose Lancaster entered, her usual confidence muted. "Miss Clara, I'm sorry to bother you, but I thought you should know. There's talk at the saloon. Some of the men are saying Calder's betraying Sarah's memory, that you've used feminine wiles to trap him." Clara's hand stilled on the delicate fabric. "I see." "It's worse," Rose continued reluctantly. "Tom Morrison overheard Silas McCrae in his cups, saying you came here with promises to him first, and when that didn't work out, you moved on to the next available man." The words hit like physical blows. Clara had known there would be talk, but the viciousness of it, the reduction of her genuine feelings to mere scheming, burned like acid. "Let them talk," Millie said fiercely. "Anyone with eyes can see the truth." But Clara knew how little truth mattered when a story was more interesting than reality. She thanked Rose for the warning and returned to her sewing, each stitch an act of defiance against the urge to pack her bags and flee. The next morning brought a new trial. Mrs. Fortner arrived for the final fitting of her riding habit, accompanied by 2 other society ladies. The conversation was polite but strained, and Clara caught the meaningful glances exchanged when they thought she wasn't looking. "Such a shame about the Reese Ranch," one of them said with false casualness. "Sarah worked so hard to make it a home. The curtains she embroidered, the garden she planted all her special touches. A new wife would have to be very secure to live with so many reminders," the other added, eyes fixed on Clara. "Of course, some women wouldn't mind benefiting from another's work." Clara kept her face composed as she marked the final adjustments, but her hands trembled slightly. After they left, she stood in her empty shop, wondering if she had the strength to weather this storm. That afternoon, Agnes and Mary didn't come for their sewing lesson. Clara waited an hour before admitting they weren't coming. The other girls arrived, but their mothers lingered at the door, watching with sharp eyes as if Clara might corrupt their daughters with her scandalous presence. Saturday evening, Calder came to call. He found Clara on the boarding house's back porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cold, staring at the stars. "I heard about the talk," he said without preamble, settling beside her on the bench. "Which version? The one where I'm a calculating opportunist or the one where I'm betraying your wife's sacred memory?" His jaw tightened. "Sarah's been gone 2 years. She wouldn't want me to spend my life alone, no matter what her cousins think." "Her cousins?" Clara turned to look at him. "The Benson family. Harriet's husband is Sarah's second cousin. They always thought she married beneath herself. taking up with a horse rancher instead of their choice, a shopkeeper's son from Denver. His voice carried old bitterness. Now they see a chance to rewrite history, make her into a saint and me into a faithless fool. They sat in silence for a moment, the night air cold around them. Then Calder spoke again, his voice low and determined. I won't let their poison touch us. Clara, what we have is good and true. I know it, you know it, and anyone who matters knows it. Do they? Clara pulled her shawl tighter. Your life is here, Calder, your ranch, your work, your connections. I'm just a seamstress who can leave any time, but can you afford to make enemies of half the county for my sake? He turned to face her fully, his eyes fierce in the lamplight spilling from the kitchen window. I can't afford not to. Clara, I spent 2 years as a ghost myself, going through motions, existing but not living. You brought me back to life not by trying to replace what I lost, but by being so completely yourself that I had to wake up and notice. People will make your life difficult. Let them try. He took her hands, his calloused palms warm against her cold fingers. I've weathered worse storms than gossip. Question is, are you willing to weather it with me? Before Clara could answer, footsteps on the porch made them look up. Silas McCrae stood at the bottom of the steps, his face haggard in the dim light. Miss Wynne, he said, his voice rough. Reese, I need to speak with you both. Clara felt Calder tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. Mr. McCrae. Silas climbed the steps slowly, like a man carrying heavy weight. I owe you an apology, Miss Wynne. What I said in the saloon, it was whiskey talking, not truth. You came here honorably, and I'm the one who failed to keep my word. He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. My girls haven't stopped talking about you since the storm. How you held Mary when she was scared. How you've taught them things I can't. Agnes told me tonight that she wants to be like you when she grows up strong and tall and not afraid of anything. Clara felt her throat tighten. Mr. McCrae. I'm not finished. He looked between them, something like pain flickering across his features. Reese, you're a good man. Better than I've been. If you and Miss Wynne have found something together, then I'm glad for it. Lord knows this territory needs more happiness, not less. He turned to go, then paused. My girls would like to continue their sewing lessons if you'll have them. I'll understand if you'd rather not, but they've had enough loss without losing you too. They're always welcome, Clara said softly. Both of them. Silas nodded once and disappeared into the darkness. Clara and Calder sat in stunned silence for a moment. That took courage, Calder said finally. Yes. Clara thought of the man who'd written those hopeful letters, the one who'd wanted a partner, not just a housekeeper. Perhaps that man was still in there, buried under grief and fear, but not entirely lost. The next day was Sunday. Clara dressed carefully for church, choosing her best dress, a deep blue that Millie said brought out her eyes. She walked with her head high, Millie on one arm for support, Calder on the other side. If people wanted to stare, let them see her flanked by two of the most respected people in Clay Ridge. The service passed in a blur of hymns and sermon. Afterward, as the congregation filed out, Clara felt the moment of judgment arrive. Would people cut them, acknowledge them coldly? The social fabric of the town would reshape itself in these small interactions. Mrs. Fortner was first, sweeping up in her new riding habit. Miss Wynne, Mr. Reese, the autumn gathering is next Saturday. I trust you'll both attend together. It was a public declaration of support, and Clara saw others taking note. We'd be honored, she replied. Judge Harper's wife followed suit, inquiring about winter cloaks. The schoolteacher asked if Clara would help with costumes for the Christmas pageant. One by one, the people who mattered, who valued Clara's work and character over gossip, made their positions clear. Harriet Benson and her circle maintained their cold disapproval, but their influence was less than they'd hoped, as Sheriff Waite's wife said loudly enough for all to hear. Some folks got nothing better to do than mind other people's business. Rest of us got lives to live. That evening, Clara found Agnes and Mary at her shop door, their father behind them looking uncomfortable but determined. "We missed our lesson," Agnes said anxiously. "We wanted to come, but I was a fool," Silas finished. "Girls, go on in. Miss Wynne and I need a word." The girls scurried inside, and Silas faced Clara squarely. "I let my own failures poison my daughter's happiness. That ends now. They need what you can teach them, not just sewing, but strength. How to be in this world without apology." "They're always welcome," Clara repeated. "Children shouldn't suffer for adult complications." He nodded, started to leave, then turned back. "For what it's worth, I hope you and Reese find happiness. Real happiness, not the shadow of it I've been living in." Inside, Clara found the girls already at work, Agnes helping Mary thread a needle. Their chatter filled the space with warmth, pushing out the lingering chill of the week's gossip. Later, as she walked them home, Mary slipped her small hand into Clara's. "Miss Clara, are you going to marry Mr. Reese? Would that upset you?" Mary considered this seriously. "Would you still teach us sewing?" "Always." "Then I think it would be nice, Mr. Reese smiles now when we see him in town. He didn't used to smile." From the mouths of children, Clara thought, came the simplest truths. People could complicate anything with their fears and judgments, but at its heart, this was simple. Two people who'd known sorrow choosing joy, choosing each other, choosing to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. The gossip would continue for a while, but it would fade as newer scandals arose. What would remain was the life she and Calder would build, the children they would teach, the place they would hold in the fabric of Clay Ridge. Not the place she'd planned, but the place she'd earned through work and courage and refusing to be made smaller by others' expectations. Snow had returned to Clay Ridge, this time gentle and steady, covering the town in a clean white blanket. Clara stood in her shop doorway, watching Silas McCrae stride down the main street. He'd changed in the past weeks. His shoulders seemed less bowed, his face less shuttered. The girls reported that he'd started joining them for meals instead of eating alone in his study. But this morning brought unexpected drama. Silas stopped directly in front of her shop, hat in hand, his expression determined but uncertain. "Miss Wynne," he began, then cleared his throat. "Clara, I need to speak with you." She stepped back, allowing him entry. He seemed to fill the small space, his presence unsettling in its intensity. For a moment, they stood awkwardly, the ghosts of failed expectations between them. "I've been a fool," he said abruptly. "When you arrived, all I could see was how you didn't match the image I'd built in my mind. I'd imagined someone who would slip into Eleanor's place without disturbing anything, who would be grateful for the chance to—" He stopped, color rising in his face. "I see now how arrogant that was." Clara remained silent, her hands folded before her, letting him find his words. "These past weeks, watching you with my girls, seeing how the town's come to respect you, how Calder looks at you," his jaw worked. "I realized I threw away something precious because I was too scared to let my life change." Mr. McCrae, I know you're with Reese now," he continued quickly. "I'm not here to interfere with that. He's a better man than I've been. But I needed to say this, to acknowledge what I lost through my own cowardice." Clara studied him, seeing past the weathered rancher to the lonely man beneath. "We can't go backward, Mr. McCrae. Even if circumstances were different, I'm not the same woman who stepped off that stagecoach. Clay Ridge has changed me." "I know." His smile was rueful. "The woman you've become wouldn't settle for what I was offering then, a half-life in the shadow of a ghost. You deserve a man who sees you, not one looking through you to find someone else." A commotion outside interrupted them. Through the window, Clara saw a crowd gathering near the saloon. Shouts echoed down the street, and Sheriff Waite was running toward the disturbance. Silas frowned. That sounds like trouble. They emerged to find half the town converging on the scene, in the street before the saloon. Calder faced 3 men Clara recognized as representatives of the Eastern Cattle Company, the outfit that had been trying to buy out local ranchers through intimidation and questionable legal means. Your answer remains no. I take it, the lead man, dressed in city clothes despite the snow, spoke with cultured contempt. It does, Calder replied evenly. As I told you before, my land's not for sale. Everything's for sale. Reese. Just a matter of finding the right pressure point. The man's gaze swept the crowd and landed on Clara. His smile turned predatory. Ah, the seamstress. I hear congratulations are in order, though I wonder how your intended would feel knowing about your previous arrangement. The crowd stirred uneasily. Clara felt Silas tense beside her, but she stepped forward before he could speak. I assume you mean my response to Mr. McCrae's advertisement for a wife, she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent street. Yes, I came to Clay Ridge for that purpose. Yes, it didn't work out as planned. And yes, I now keep company with Mr. Reese. Would you like me to embroider it on a sampler for you? Or is common knowledge sufficient? Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. The Eastern man's face darkened. You're mighty bold for a woman who relies on this town's goodwill for her living. She has that goodwill. Mrs. Fortner announced, stepping from the crowd. Miss Wynne has proven her worth through her work and character, not through intimidation and threats. Indeed, Judge Harper added, moving to stand with them. And any attempts to harm Miss Wynne's business will be met with the full force of law. We don't tolerate that kind of behavior in Clay Ridge. One by one, others stepped forward. Sheriff Waite, Jacob Muller, even Harriet Benson's husband, defying his wife's disapproval. The message was clear. Clara was theirs now, under the town's protection. The lead man's smile became a sneer. Touching, but this doesn't change anything. Reese, you can't hold out forever. Watch me, Calder said simply. The Eastern men retreated, but their presence left a chill beyond the winter air. As the crowd dispersed, Silas approached Calder. They'll be back, he said. Men like that don't give up easy. I know. Calder's eyes found Clara. But some things are worth fighting for. Silas nodded slowly. Yes, they are. He looked between them, something passing across his face, regret, perhaps, but also acceptance. You have my support, both of you, whatever comes. He touched his hat to Clara and walked away, his stride purposeful. Agnes appeared from the crowd, having watched everything with wide eyes. Papa spoke up for you, she said wonderingly. In front of everyone. He did, Clara agreed, still processing the morning's events. Does this mean you might come for dinner sometime, all of us together? The hope in the girl's voice was painful to hear. Clara glanced at Calder, who nodded slightly. Perhaps. We'll see. That evening, Clara worked late on the Christmas pageant costumes, her mind turning over the day's confrontations. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Calder entered, bringing the smell of snow and leather. Quite a morning, he said, warming his hands by her small stove. Silas apologized, publicly stood with us. She set down her sewing. I didn't expect that. Man's finding his way back to himself. Happens sometimes, when the grief finally loosens its grip. Calder sat in the consultation chair, watching her. Those Eastern men worry me more. They've forced out 2 families already, down south. Legal manipulation, mostly. But there've been accidents too, suspicious ones. Are you in danger? Maybe, probably. He met her eyes steadily. I need you to know that before we go any further, being with me might mean more than just gossip and social troubles. Clara rose and went to him, framing his face with her hands. "Do you think I'm so easily frightened I've already started over once with nothing but my sewing kit and determination? I can do it again if needed. I don't want you to have to, and I don't want you facing this alone." She kissed him gently. "We're partners, Calder, in all things." He pulled her onto his lap, holding her close. "How did I get so lucky?" "Luck had nothing to do with it," Clara said. "We both chose to try again, despite the risks. That's not luck, that's courage." They sat together in the lamplight, snow falling softly outside, both aware that storms were coming but choosing to face them together. In the morning, there would be more challenges the Eastern Cattle Company wouldn't give up easily, and integrating their lives would have its own complications. But tonight, in the warm circle of light, with useful work at hand and love carefully growing between them, they had everything they needed. Clara picked up her sewing again, Calder content to watch her work, and the quiet domestic scene held more defiance than any public declaration. They were building something here, not just a romance, but a partnership that could weather whatever came. The Eastern men could threaten, the gossips could whisper, the past could cast its shadows, but none of it could touch the essential truth two people who'd known loss had found each other and chosen to build again. "Stay a while longer," Clara said, her needle flashing in the light. "I'll make tea." "I'll stay as long as you'll have me," Calder replied, and they both knew he meant more than just tonight. Outside, Clay Ridge settled under its blanket of snow. The saloon's music muffled and distant, but in the seamstress shop behind Millie Bradshaw's boarding house, light glowed warm against the winter dark, and two people sat together in comfortable silence, stitching their lives together one moment at a time. The confrontation with Silas had closed one chapter the might-have-been that never was. The stand against the Eastern men had opened another, the fight for the future they were choosing. And in between, in this quiet moment, was the present real, solid, and theirs to shape. Clara smiled as she worked, thinking how life rarely followed the patterns you laid out for it. Sometimes you had to adjust as you went, improvising and adapting, trusting that the final design would be worth all the unexpected changes. Looking at Calder, seeing the peace in his face that hadn't been there months ago, she knew this pattern, unplanned as it was, would be her finest work. The sound of shattering wood and terrified horses woke the town before dawn. Clara bolted upright in her small room, heart pounding. Through her window, she could see flames reflected against the snow, the direction of Calder's ranch. She dressed hastily, hands shaking as she pulled on her boots. By the time she reached the street, half the town was already mobilizing. Men loaded water barrels onto wagons while women gathered medical supplies. Sheriff Waite was organizing the response, his face grim in the flickering light. "It's Reese's place," he confirmed when he saw Clara. "Looks like the horse barn." Clara climbed aboard Millie's wagon without hesitation. The older woman, still recovering but refusing to stay behind, gripped the reins with determined hands. "Those Eastern bastards," she muttered. "This is their doing, mark my words." The 5-mile journey seemed endless. As they crested the final hill, Clara's worst fears materialized. The horse barn was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like desperate prayers. Men formed bucket lines from the well, but it was clearly too late for the structure. Their focus now was keeping the fire from spreading to the house and other buildings. Clara found Calder near the corral, his face black with soot, burns on his hands as he worked to calm the rescued horses. His shirt was torn, and she could see bloody scratches across his shoulders. "Calder," he turned at her voice, relief flickering across his exhausted features. "Clara, you shouldn't be here." "Hush." She guided him to where Dr. Morrison was setting up his medical station. "Let me see your hands." As she helped clean and bandage his burns, he told her what had happened. "Heard the horses screaming just after midnight. By the time I got out there, the whole back wall was ablaze. Managed to get most of them out, but," His voice broke. Lost 2 of the young ones, trapped in the back stalls. Clara's heart ached for him. Those horses weren't just livestock, they were his life's work, each one known by name and temperament. This wasn't an accident. No. His jaw tightened. Found a broken lantern that shouldn't have been there, and tracks in the snow, leading toward the main road. Sheriff Waite approached, notebook in hand. Got the same story from your ranch hand. He saw riders heading east just before the fire started. We'll track them come daylight, but, he shrugged, frustrated. Proving anything will be another matter. As dawn broke, the full extent of the damage became clear. The barn was a total loss, along with feed stores, tack, and equipment. The surviving horses milled nervously in the corral, some bearing burns and cuts. The house had been saved, but smoke damage was extensive. 20 years of building, Calder said quietly, staring at the smoldering ruins. Gone in a few hours. Clara took his bandaged hand carefully. Not gone. Damaged. Yes, but you're alive. Most of the horses survived, and buildings can be rebuilt. With what? The defeat in his voice was worse than anger would have been. I put everything into those bloodlines. That breeding program. Insurance won't cover mysterious fires. And without the barn, I can't keep the horses through winter. Then we'll find another way. Clara's mind was already working. The town will help. You've helped enough of them over the years. As if to prove her point, wagons began arriving as the sun climbed higher. The Hendersons brought lumber salvaged from their old barn. Tom Morrison arrived with a crew from the saloon rough men who knew how to work. Even Silas McCrae appeared with his ranch hands and a wagon load of feed. Nobody burns out a neighbor on my watch, Silas said gruffly, already directing his men to clear debris. Agnes and Mary are safe at the Bradshaw place, he added to Clara. Didn't want them seeing this. The women set up an outdoor kitchen, feeding the workers who streamed in throughout the day. Clara found herself coordinating supplies, her organizational skills serving a different purpose than usual. Rose Lancaster worked alongside the minister's wife, their social differences forgotten in the face of crisis. By noon, the skeleton of a new barn was rising from the ashes. It wouldn't be as large or fine as the original, but it would shelter the horses. Men who competed with each other in business worked side by side, united in defiance of outside threats. This is what they don't understand, Mrs., Fortner said, pausing beside Clara with a water bucket. Those Eastern men think we're just scattered individuals they can pick off one by one. They don't realize we're a community. As the day wore on, Clara noticed Calder's spirits lifting, each beam raised. Each gesture of support seemed to restore something the fire had taken. When Judge Harper announced he was organizing a legal fund to fight any foreclosure attempts, several others immediately contributed. Late afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. The lead representative of the Eastern Cattle Company arrived with 2 companions, their city clothes incongruous among the workers. They surveyed the construction with calculating eyes. Unfortunate accident, the leader said, his tone suggesting anything but sympathy. These wooden structures are so vulnerable. Of course, if you'd sold when we offered, you'd have been safely elsewhere when this tragedy occurred. Calder stepped forward, but Sheriff Waite was faster. Mr. Thornton, I believe I'll need to ask you some questions about your whereabouts last night. I was at the hotel, as you well know. Thornton's smile was cold. Playing cards with respectable witnesses until well past midnight. Terrible timing for poor Reese here. But then, I suppose that's the risk of standing alone against progress. He's not alone, Clara said, moving to stand beside Calder. Around them, the workers had stopped, forming a loose circle. Thornton's eyes narrowed. Ah, the seamstress, still fighting above your weight. I see, though I wonder how long your knight will stay gallant when he's lost everything. Ranch work is hard for a woman. Perhaps you'd be better off returning to your needle and thread. My needle and thread help clothe half this county. Clara replied evenly. Including, I suspect, some of your own men when they need repairs, though I may have to reconsider that policy." A murmur of approval ran through the crowd. Other business owners began speaking up. The general store would no longer serve Eastern cattle employees. The saloon would find them unwelcome. The blacksmith too busy for their horses. Thornton's composure cracked slightly. "You can't boycott legitimate business interests. I'll have the law. I am the law in Clay Ridge." Sheriff Waite interrupted. "And I enforce it fairly. That means investigating mysterious fires, regardless of who has alibis." He smiled thinly. "It also means ensuring peaceful business practices. Any more accidents, and I'll be looking real hard at everyone involved." The Eastern men retreated, but their parting looks promised this wasn't over. As their carriage rolled away, the workers returned to construction with renewed energy. "You shouldn't have challenged them," Calder said quietly to Clara. "They'll target you now, too." "Let them try." She gestured at the rising barn, at their neighbors working in common purpose. "They think we're weak because we're not wealthy like them. They don't understand that strength comes from connection, not isolation." That evening, as the sun set over the new barn frame, the workers gathered for a meal. Someone had brought a fiddle, and music drifted across the ranch. Children played among the lumber stacks while adults shared food and determination. Clara found herself beside Calder on the porch steps, watching their community celebration amid the day's destruction. His bandaged hands rested in his lap, and exhaustion lined his face. But something had eased in his expression. "I couldn't have faced this alone," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought strength meant not needing anyone. But this," he gestured at the scene before them, "this is real strength." "We all need each other," Clara said. "That's not weakness, it's wisdom." Agnes and Mary appeared, having been brought by Millie for the evening meal. They ran to Clara, full of questions and concerns. As she assured them that everything would be well, she caught Calder watching with an expression that made her breath catch. Later, as wagons prepared to return to town, Millie pulled Clara aside. "You'll stay here tonight," she said firmly. "That man needs watching. Head injuries can be tricky. And before you protest propriety, there's enough folk camping here to satisfy any busybody." Clara didn't argue. As the night deepened, she sat with Calder on the porch, a quilt wrapped around their shoulders. The burnt smell still hung in the air, but it was overlaid now with fresh sawdust and hope. "I love you," Calder said suddenly. "Should have said it before, but I was waiting for the right moment. Today taught me there's no such thing, there's only now." "I love you too," Clara replied, leaning into his warmth. "Burns, debts, Eastern threats and all." He laughed, the sound rusty but real. "You're sure you want this life? It's not what you planned when you answered that advertisement." The best things rarely are. She thought of all the paths that had led here, the failed arrangement with Silas, the shop she'd built, the place she'd carved in Clay Ridge life. "I came looking for one future and found another, this one with you, with this community. With work that matters, this is worth fighting for." In the morning, there would be more challenges. The Eastern Cattle Company wouldn't give up, and rebuilding would strain resources. But tonight, under stars that seemed to offer benediction, two people who'd survived loss chose to face the future together. The new barn stood skeletal against the sky, a promise of resurrection. And on the porch, Clara and Calder sat together, no longer alone against the storm. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers across the Montana grasslands, painting the hills in purple lupine and golden buttercups. The new barn stood complete at Calder's ranch, a testament to community resilience. But it was the transformation of the old Hendricks place into a proper venue that had the whole county talking. Clara stood in what would be the main hall, directing the placement of benches borrowed from 3 different churches. The spring social had grown from Millie's simple idea into something grander, a celebration of survival, of community, of refusing to be driven apart by outside forces. Higher on the left, She called to Tom Morrison, who was hanging lanterns. "We want them to catch the light from both windows." "You're worse than my wife," he grumbled good-naturedly, adjusting the placement. "Though I'll admit, you've got an eye for making things look right." The past months had been a whirlwind of challenges overcome. The Eastern Cattle Company had tried everything legal maneuvers, economic pressure, even attempting to bring in their own sheriff candidate. Each move had been met with unified resistance. Clara's shop had become an unofficial headquarters for planning their defense. Her workroom filled as often with strategy meetings as with fabric. Miss Clara, Agnes McCrae, burst through the door, Mary close behind. Both girls had grown in the months since Clara's arrival, not just in height, but in confidence. "Papa says to tell you the musicians are here." Indeed, Clara could hear the sound of instruments tuning up. They'd managed to hire a proper band from Billings. Partly funded by the legal victory Judge Harper had won against the Eastern Company's fraudulent land claims. As she supervised the final preparations, Clara felt a familiar presence behind her. Calder's arms encircled her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Ready for tonight," he murmured. "As ready as one can be for publicly announcing an engagement at a dance where half the county will be watching," she replied, leaning back against him. Second thoughts. "Never." She turned in his arms to face him. "Though I do wonder what that scared woman who stepped off the stagecoach last year would think of all this." "I think she'd be proud of who you've become." His expression grew serious. "I know I am." As afternoon gave way to evening, people began arriving. Wagons and horses filled the field outside. Families dressed in their finest streaming into the decorated hall. Clara had changed into her newest creation, a dress of deep green silk that complemented her height rather than trying to diminish it. Millie had insisted on doing her hair, sweeping it up in an elegant style that showed off the amber earrings Calder had given her. "You clean up nice, Reese," Sheriff Waite commented as Calder joined the receiving line. "Almost don't recognize you without horse dust and hay in your hair." The hall filled quickly. Clara was touched to see the mix of people, ranchers and townfolk, shop owners and saloon workers, even some of the sporting house girls in their most modest dresses. Rose Lancaster wore the dove-gray dress Clara had made her, looking every inch a respectable woman. The dancing began with a grand march, Judge Harper leading with his wife. As the evening progressed, social lines blurred in the democracy of the dance floor. Clara found herself partnered with everyone from teenage boys tongue-tied with nerves to old Mr. Garrett, who counted the steps aloud. Time was, a gathering like this would have been strictly sordid. "Mrs. Fortner observed during a break between sets. The right people with the right people. But the frontier has a way of teaching us what really matters." As the clock neared 9, the musicians paused. Sheriff Waite called for attention, and the crowd quieted expectantly. Clara felt her heart racing as Calder took her hand and led her to the front of the room. "Friends," Calder began, his voice carrying clearly. "You all know Clara Wynne came to Clay Ridge with one set of plans. Life had other ideas, as it often does. But sometimes what we find is better than what we sought." He turned to Clara, his eyes warm with love and certainty. "Clara, you've brought light back into my life. You've shown me that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting the past, but honoring it by living fully. Will you marry me?" The proposal was public, but the moment felt private as Clara met his gaze. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, I will." The hall erupted in applause. Agnes and Mary rushed forward to embrace Clara, their joy infectious. Even Silas McCrae, standing near the back with a woman Clara recognized as the new schoolteacher, raised his glass in salute. "About time," Millie called out, causing laughter. "I was beginning to think you two would court until the mountains wore down." As the music resumed, Clara found herself at the center of a whirlwind of congratulations. Women admired her ring, a simple band with a small emerald that had been Calder's grandmother's. Men clapped Calder on the back, welcoming him back to the land of the living. "No rules tonight," Someone called out Clara couldn't see who, and the phrase rippled through the crowd, becoming a toast, a celebration of freedom to choose joy over fear. Then sleep close, Calder whispered in her ear, completing their private refrain, and Clara laughed with pure happiness. The dancing continued late into the night. Clara watched as relationships shifted and evolved. Silas dancing with the schoolteacher, his daughters beaming approval. Rose Lancaster in animated conversation with the banker's son, who seemed unconcerned with her past. Millie holding court from her chair, directing social traffic with the skill of a general. Near midnight, as things began to wind down, an unexpected guest appeared. Mr. Thornton from the Eastern Cattle Company stood in the doorway, taking in the scene with calculating eyes. The music stopped. Men moved subtly to block exits while women pulled children closer. But Thornton raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "I come with a message," he said. "My employers have decided Clay Ridge is not conducive to our business model. We'll be withdrawing our interests and moving operations elsewhere." Just like that, Sheriff Waite's hand rested on his pistol. Thornton's smile was bitter. "You've made it clear we're not welcome. Every business closed to us, every legal maneuver blocked, every accident investigated thoroughly. It's become unprofitable to continue." His gaze swept the room, landing on Clara. "You win, Miss Wynne. You and your community." He spoke the last word like it tasted bad. "Enjoy your victory dance." He left as suddenly as he'd appeared, and for a moment, silence held. Then someone, it might have been Tom Morrison, let out a whoop of triumph, and the hall exploded in celebration. "We did it, Mrs." Fortner said wonderingly. "We actually drove them off." "We did it together," Clara corrected. "All of us." The band struck up a victory dance, and couples flooded the floor. Clara found herself spun from partner to partner in a blur of joy and relief. When she finally returned to Calder's arms, both of them were breathless with laughter. "No more looking over our shoulders," he said. "We can build our life without that shadow." "Our life," Clara repeated, savoring the words. "I like the sound of that." As the evening finally ended and families began departing, Clara stood with Calder on the hall's front steps, watching their community scatter back to homes and ranches. The moon hung full and bright, silvering the landscape that had become her heart's home. "Any regrets?" Calder asked softly. "This isn't the life you signed up for when you answered that advertisement." Clara thought of the woman she'd been. Neat plans, careful expectations, dreams of a predetermined future. Then she looked at what she'd found instead: a thriving business, a place in a community that had claimed her as their own, students who looked up to her, friends who stood by her, and a love that had grown from mutual respect and shared strength. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This life, messy and unexpected and wonderful, this is exactly where I belong." In the distance, a wolf howled, and its pack answered a wild chorus that spoke of freedom and family and home. Clara leaned into Calder's warmth, watching the last wagons disappear into the night, carrying their neighbors back to their own dreams and challenges. Tomorrow would bring wedding plans and new commissions and the ordinary miracles of daily life. But tonight had been perfect, a community dancing in defiance of those who would divide them, celebrating love that grew from loss, honoring the courage to begin again. "Shall we go home?" Calder asked. "Yes," Clara said, taking his offered arm. "Let's go home." As they walked toward their horses, Clara glanced back at the hall one more time. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the night breeze, and scattered flowers from the decorations dotted the ground like stars fallen to earth. It was beautiful and temporary, and absolutely real, like all the best moments in life. Under the vast Montana sky, two people who had learned to love again rode toward their future, no longer alone, but part of something larger, a community, a family. A life built on the truth that sometimes the best patterns are the ones you create as you go, one careful stitch at a time. Thank you for listening to this story of love, loss, and new beginnings in the American frontier. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect and discuss Clara and Calder's journey together. If you enjoyed this tale from the Wild West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit the like button. And don't forget to press the hype button to help more listeners discover these stories of courage and community in the Old West. Until next time, keep riding toward your own horizons.